Good morning. Now this session, explanation about the Buddha Dharma. So I'm extremely happy. We have Buddhist brothers, sisters from different Buddhist countries. First in Mongolia, then I think from Sri Lanka, then Korea,
Thailand.
Thai, that's right. And Chinese?
Korea.
You Chinese? No. So, the Buddhists from Sri Lanka and Thailand, they are the practitioner of Pali tradition. So that is the foundation of Buddha Dharma. And among Buddhist followers, the holder of Pali tradition or the elder. So my respect. Then Sanskrit tradition is concerned, Chinese Buddhist, and then Korea, Japan, Vietnam, and Tibet and Mongolia. So, among them, the Chinese tradition, or Chinese, also the Sanskrit tradition holder, Chinese Buddhist holder of Sanskrit tradition, are senior. So then, we Tibetan are youngest, only after 7th century. Mongolia's case, I heard first the Buddhism reached Mongolia perhaps before reaching Tibet, first one. Then second and third, then Buddhism come from Tibet. So today's Buddha Dharma, which practicing by Mongolian, does come from Tibet. So for Tibetan case, Indians are our guru. In the Mongolians case, we are their guru. So now basically, the Pali tradition and the Sanskrit tradition, two traditions. The Sanskrit tradition, the Pali tradition also they take.
No.
So some kind of, I think, combine Pali tradition as a foundation, then Sanskrit tradition. In the Sanskrit tradition, I think Buddhist logics maybe, I think, develop much stronger in the
extensively.
More extensive in the Sanskrit tradition. Then also the Buddhist Tantrayana, Buddhist Tantric, also then I think in Sanskrit tradition, Buddhist Tantrayana also much
is present. No.
So then Tibetan tradition since Tibetan tradition, which is started after Nalanda, famous Nalanda tradition, well established in India. Therefore, Tibetan tradition, actually the pure lineage of Nalanda tradition. That's very clear. All those major texts of Buddhism, mainly Sanskrit and some Pali, which we learned
Study.
by heart from young age. Rimshi Thama Pecha Lunzi Shidu Kol Kazare. Pecha Thama Lunzi Shidu Kol Kazare. Pecha Pecha Simdu. Ha. Chongaze. Oh. His case, around 14, 15 years, start his learning. My case, about 6, 7 years, very young, I started learning by heart. At that time, no interest. Almost like a burden. So in daily time, when my tutor come, that almost
I used to feel almost as if the sun was setting and getting darker.
So such a student is really, let's say, I think, I always prefer play like that. So maybe a stupid student. So my point is, all those texts which we learned by heart, all wrote by Nalanda masters. So it is quite clear. And then later, we study commentaries of these root texts. So Tibetan Buddhism, I usually describe the Theravada tradition and the Sanskrit tradition, including Buddhist Tantrayana tradition, all complete. So that's Nalanda tradition. Like one of top, or say, scholar, as well as Buddhist master, Nagarjuna, he himself, wrote Tantrayana, and of course, Madhyamika philosophy. Madhyamika philosophy, I think something like combined with logics. So Nagarjuna, one of the top scholar of the Nalanda, is logician, also philosopher, also very good Buddhist monk, and also physicians, and also some kind of chemistry.
Also a kind of a chemist as well.
So we can, I think, consider him as a, at that time, sort of what's a scientist. So his brain is really brilliant. In his writing, he make very precise sort of the distinction. Certain Buddha's word, which he found contradictory with logical reasons, then he rejected these things. Then only those texts which logically can prove, then he accepts these are the
These are definitive statements of the Buddha.
Because Buddha himself is made clear that my follower accept my teaching not out of respect, but rather your own investigation and experiment. So he make very clear some kind of liberty to investigate Buddha's own word. Because the Buddha taught different philosophies due to among his followers there are different mental disposition. Therefore, he deliberately teach different philosophy or different concept, which itself contradictory. So sometimes I jokingly telling audience, these contradictory philosophy taught by Buddha, one Buddha, same teacher, certainly it is certainly not due to his own confusion, certainly not, nor he deliberately create confusion among his student, certainly not. Then why he taught is in these different philosophy, contradictory philosophy? The answer is there are different sort of mental disposition, mental capacity in different karmic
propensities. No. There are differences among the individual's karmic propensities.
So this very helpful to look other tradition, non-Buddhist tradition. Yes, there are people who may not find Buddhist approach is suitable. So we need different approach, different way of approach, according different mental disposition of people at different location, different time. So this very helpful, to develop the accept of pluralism of religions is very useful. So Tibetan tradition, in some time ago, I mean the early part of the 20th century, some scholar described Tibetan Buddhism as not genuine Buddhism, but something deviated. Right?
No, deviant. No.
And called
degenerate. Degenerate form of Buddhism.
Degenerate of Buddhism, which called Lamaism. I think that is, expression or description of lack of knowledge. So usually, I always telling or introduce Tibetan Buddhism is pure tradition of Nalanda institution. Then, meanwhile, I also want to say, in 8th century, the one of top logicians as well as a philosopher or master of Nalanda came to Tibet. His name Shantarakshita. He, I think, encouraged Tibetan emperor, now you Tibetan should hold Buddha Dharma through your own language. So it is much better translate. In Mongolia's case, now for example, through centuries, although they have their own language, their own script, but they prefer, you see, study with Tibetan language. Right. In Tibet case, I think because of the broad-minded or because of wise soul, far-sighted, yes, far-sighted. I think both Tibetan emperor and mainly, I think the Nalanda, this particular sort of scholar, he advised all those texts should translate into Tibetan. So at the Samya monastery, there's suppose I think the first monastery is a Buddhist monastery in Tibet. Actually, that monastery, it said the construction of that monastery carried under the instruction of Shantarakshita. So there are different departments. One department for translation, one department for meditation, one department for Vinaya Kasota, do
a monastic discipline,
and start taking monk's vow. So first time, 8th century, under that master's leadership. Another department like more ritual or ceremony or Tantrayana. And of course, meantime, the Pema Sambhava also there. He carry, I think his direct responsibility is to eliminate all the negative forces of Buddha Dharma. And meantime, he also used to carry some tantric teaching. So eventually, Tibetan language now today, I think up to now, Tibetan language is the one of the almost the best language among the translations of original Sanskrit text. So in 20th century, some Western scholars, they found Tibetan translations are very authentic, accurate. Now, now only 1 hour. So I don't know how to start actual explanation about the Buddha Dharma. Perhaps now I switch Tibetan language. The Shijing Doi Tsikshare, Lekjagda Tsik, similar, sim machite, sim Jirangshin, Versao Sachi, the Tubusumche, similar Sadigi, Maranzu, Samaloda, Didu saw Shum Sachi Yari, Didu saw the semi Pembucho on Yamari, Simdank on Yari. 저장가고 시바든 저희 들으지. 근데 인도 치세미 뱀변 내주사 뭐임 봐. nang sheba se di modu tona sheba shebe semla ta dewa de dungye se di tardu na sim tu mo tu ge ne any di du di yong de yare sim tu 차주 시안의 팬들도야 내가 메시야 되게让대화야 심 모두에 시안의 차와치야 되게让동네야 근데 메인드잖아요 심 캐치모리스 셈라스 다음에 되게 셈디 아니 말아서 로리야 녀에 타네 롬 셰바스야 저도 로리야 지 레무도 와 류의 셈 슬르드 지 거래 셰바스네 지 양가와로 지 거래 상라로 지 로르 샤이무도 와 생생법사지 로르 샤이무도 진짜지 여러분들은 요마리스 셈로 셈머치디스 셈 러시 동네스 셈세야디 애네 랑게 차셔를 때네 딱섬시를 마도 애네 넘버 쉐바 세님 거라 때바메베 라지 요마리스 소나 애네 대성도 마세베 셈지 런신디 치멜레바제 마레스 셈 모투어스야디 셈 두즈네 모투에 런신도 기대하지 요마레스 모투어스야 두 모투스야디 아니 루브루에 남도게 겐지 있는 모투어 차친 버레 마도 셈 런신기 그 런신이 사선 직선 녀에 땅에다가 치멜레바 요마레스 치멜모 치멜을 흑게 요마레스 뜻이에요.
Perhaps I will begin with a citation from a well-known scripture, Buddhist scripture, which belongs to the genre of scripture known as the perfection of wisdom. And the statement goes as following. The mind is devoid of mind because the nature of mind is clear light. So this statement, we can look at it three different aspects of the Buddhist thought on the basis of this particular statement. So the first part deals with the phenomenon that we call mind. So when we speak of mind, we are already talking about a phenomenon that is directly related to our experience of happiness and suffering, pain and pleasure. And also, for example, when we speak of the experience of pain and pleasure, suffering and happiness, we are already talking about sentient beings who have the capacity to feel these experiences. We are not talking about inanimate objects which has no capacity for experience of that kind. So directly we are talking about a phenomenon that is not material, that is experiential in their nature. So in other words, we are talking about a phenomenon known as consciousness or mind. And the key point being made here is to emphasize the importance of the role of consciousness and mind in our experience of pain and pleasure, because we all naturally aspire for happiness, seek happiness, and wish to overcome suffering. And the role of mind in that aspiration is very crucial, because according to Buddhism, suffering and pain is understood to be a function of an untamed and undisciplined mind, and happiness and joy is understood to be a function of a tamed and disciplined mind. And so that's why the first part of the statement, mind is devoid of mind, the first part of the statement emphasizes the role of mind and consciousness in our fundamental experience of happiness and suffering. The second part of the statement is mind is devoid of mind. And this part points to our understanding of mind itself. In our naive perception, we tend to feel as if there is something called mind that is somehow concrete, that is somehow real. And so what the Buddha is pointing out is that this naive assumption of there being some kind of solid thing or concrete thing called mind is a false, distorted understanding. And then the final part, which states that the nature of mind is clear light, then points towards the ultimate nature of mind. The ultimate nature of mind is a phenomenon that whose reality and existence.
Ultimate nature is already conventionally.
The same Guranshi.
Conventionally,
So the final part, the nature of mind is clear light, points towards the nature of mind where its reality can only be understood in terms of dependent relations of causes and conditions. And beyond that dependent relation, one cannot posit a mind that is separate from that relationship. And furthermore, it also points to us that in its essential nature, mind is pure. Our mind is deluded, but these delusion and the pollutants of the mind are adventitious. And the pollutions of the mind, contamination, really result from kind of more thought processes and conceptual processes, which has the tendency to obscure and taint our essential nature of the mind. However, the essential nature of mind is luminosity and this mere experience, and at that level, our mind is clear light. Our mind is free of pollution. So these things are pointed out in this one statement of the Buddha, that mind is devoid of mind because the essential nature of the nature of mind is clear light.
This is love chobe no sometimes da samla sa digi da sem tu mo du gi ta ne di du ya yi be du sa ne ding shi nam sha di samla sa de ne twa mu ya de sem ma chi de sa de sem me be ke ma wa ta samla sem ma chi de sem de sem ge rang xin be sem yare, sem truth yare, in a she's to your Veslavina, to your maris. Saturday into Zane, Tigabla, Senisum said, Chacho yare, the time we are, the Usim Nigalo, Tumunk, Gazalia, any Tungshi Chagent, Semla. That Digala, Garja, Sem Dinducha. Garja, Sem Dindu. Te tongwe any sem tendon chuni sha. So sinisum se namsha chi. Ta tongni namsha sha in zane kang tongbe gagja. Gagja te shi kang tendon tongbe tongshi. Cheni xianwang gunda yongzhu sa di usim niga lo da song de do. Page da di sem lo sem ma chi de sa ge ji. 다 심지어는 어서 세야데 디시 가서 디시 닝분도 디시 닝분도 임베요 챤니 디나라 아니 감 디시 닝부 챤니 좀 마범에 심지 춘이 점라 또 마세베 심 코랑 것 때문에 디시 닝부 송도와 맞다 디송이야 래 당나가 남샤지 되는 데임이야 래 나가 사람들이
So, to summarize, what we can understand from this single statement is that the first part of the statement, where Buddha says that the mind is, here the importance of the role of mind is being emphasized, and since the key role of mind in determining how an undisciplined mind, an untamed mind leads to suffering, and tamed and disciplined mind leads to happiness, this cause and effect relationship is being presented. Therefore, in relation to this first part of the statement, the entire teachings of the Buddha on the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering and its origin, cause, and cessation, can be related in that context of understanding the role of mind. The second part of the statement, that mind is devoid of mind, can be understood as pointing towards the ultimate nature of mind, because although we assume the mind to possess some kind of objective, independent existence of its own, but however, if you critically analyze and search for that phenomenon, then you cannot find a phenomenon that is solid, concrete, and independent of the basis upon which the phenomenon, the label mind is being applied. So here one can speak about what the middle way philosophers school and mind-only school talk about three natures of the mind. So here, when we speak about the nature of mind, so the mind itself would be the basis, and what is being negated is our imputation of mind as possessing some kind of truly substantial reality. So that is the imputed nature, and then the absence of that imputed nature on the basis, which is mind, is the emptiness nature, or the thoroughly established nature. So what it points to is that mind, which we assume to possess this real existence, is actually devoid of such substantial reality, and that absence of that substantial reality is the mind's true nature. And then the third part, because
real existence, right?
No, substantially real existence. So the third part, because the mind is clear light, the nature of mind is clear light, then can be seen as pointing towards the Buddha's teaching on the Buddha nature, the Tathagata Garbha, the essence of Buddhahood. So when we speak of this, the essence of Buddhahood, the seat of Buddhahood, it can refer both to the emptiness of mind, which is the ultimate nature, but also to the clear light nature of mind, which is a subjective quality of our mind. And it is in respect to this second part of the nature, which is the clear light nature of mind, that the Buddhist Vajrayana teachings are related. It is in the exploration and deepening of understanding of that clear light nature of mind that the Vajrayana teachings become relevant.
So, now finished. Introduction of Buddha Dharma.
So this is like the summary.
That for noble truths, Lucerne, Tang Samalo, the Pali, Jim the Shango Tangbu coins and Demeshi sorry. Chazanga, that Demeshi said, Kasuri, Mindu Dungenche, Devadi, Devache, Devadi, Tang this Samura. Dunge de ya Dunge Dunge, so Dunge. Nanzu so Deva, Namjunga do the Tantrayana, so Deva de Yahoo Samdama, the Dunge Denge Cherry, didn't you mean to say, you it to me? That Diniga log, Shirudi, Lanu Shawanjangi. Kiawachi, my Indusane, to meet in with the tension we are. D to make South Richard. The news and Dujik to Miss Asha. Didn't Indu, under data to Mille Chogu, say to me the saw to make it Gomare. To make Tada get ten reaching, Lanu Shawanjangi, the Pungus name, Lanu Shawanjangi Kiawati. Didn't you mean to meet the Shaba Indusane, the hot dear. Tea doctor, Lanu, the Jawa, the Zawan and Mabachasona, not tend to tell it. Or that they are delicious shiny. So there is a share. Kneeling you pumbu to me, never surety, they are shining. Tend to tell cherry. Or that didn't you be to Jelisha, Dejelisha. This is all right. Kanda, Nazu concern you at. Dunge da Dunge Bangbe, Dawadi, Danzu, Nanzu Nanga Yodeva. That Piggy Tandang Gang Shumbu the Dinichadeva. That Dini would be Dunge Shiver Jurgis Leve, Dunge Machavi Amari. They are top of Jurgis Leve, they are Toku Amari. Didu Nibuti Rangi, Julatane, Julatanatane, Chumbo Indusane, Devu Tunge Minduba Digi, Tungeki Juti Shevakane, Melso Yari. Tendo Tawati Shevakane, Tendo Tawati Devayina, Tendo Tawati Dujiki, Juti, Kaim, Shevakane, Te Tangulango Yari. Di Karjungo Slavina, Sanje, Tumumain Beta, Tawa, Tension Deborah said Shevre. Tendril Sadi, Adakabdi, Junjit said Shayari. Didu Sambe, Chokanda, Georgengi, Midawaran Shig, Chokanda Kainaya, Rangi Juda, Jan, Samlatane, any Gishin, Jibe, Tani to Jordan. Other Digi, Junjit Tenjum, Sadi, Zawa Tita, Naveto, Tumwin with the shot. Titane, she's a Titane, any Dabashes at the turn.
So, making that as a summary outline of Buddhism, to elaborate a little bit more, let's look at the Buddha's teaching on Four Noble Truths. The Buddha's teaching on Four Noble Truths really forms the common foundation for both the Pali and the Sanskrit tradition. And if we look at the teachings of the Four Noble Truths, we are essentially talking about a mechanism for fulfilling our basic aspiration to seek happiness and to overcome suffering. So this is really the Four Noble Truths. Teachings on the Four Noble Truths really pertain to this fundamental concern of all sentient beings, that is to naturally aspire for happiness and to seek to overcome suffering. So when we use the such language as seeking to overcome suffering in the Buddhist context, we need to have a deeper understanding of what is meant by suffering in this particular context. Generally in Buddhism, a distinction is made between three levels of suffering. One is the suffering of suffering, that is the evident suffering of our pain and so on, which we all conventionally recognize as painful experiences and suffering. So that is at the level of feeling and sensation. Then there is a second level of suffering known as the suffering of change, and this includes even those experiences which we conventionally identify as pleasurable and joyful, and they are referred to as suffering because they have a tendency, if you indulge in them for too long, they have a tendency to lead on to dissatisfaction and further suffering. So therefore they are recognized as suffering. And then there's the third level of suffering, which is known as the suffering of conditioning, pervasive conditioning. And this refers to our fundamental fact of existing in a conditioned way, our conditioned existence based upon affliction. And this fundamental fact of our existence is recognized as suffering because it is at the root of the first two levels of suffering. So in the Buddhist context, a practitioner, when he or she aspires for attaining happiness and wish to overcome suffering, the suffering that he or she wishes to overcome is really at this fundamental, root level of suffering. And therefore, the happiness that is being sought in the context of the teachings of the Four Noble Truths refers to direct opposite of that suffering. And the direct opposite of that suffering is the state of cessation, where all the root sufferings have come to an end. Not just the suffering, but also the causes and conditions that leads to that suffering that has come to an end. And this is what is meant by aspiring to seek happiness and aspiring to seek to overcome suffering in the context of a Buddhist practitioner. So, and now, in engaging in such a kind of an aspiration, it is not adequate then to make the prayer, make the aspiration, may all sufferings come to an end, may I attain the true freedom that is happiness. Making such aspiration alone is not adequate. What is required is to understand the causal mechanism and relations, that causes and conditions that lead to suffering that we wish to overcome. What are the and on the basis of that understanding, one needs to avoid creating these causes and conditions, and also one need to look into the causes and conditions that would lead to this ultimate happiness that we are seeking for, and on the basis of that understanding one must cultivate those causes and conditions, and it is on that basis one needs to fulfill that basic aspiration of seeking happiness and overcome suffering. So what this tells us, illustrate, is a fundamental philosophical principle in Buddhism, which is the principle of dependent origination. Because in Buddhism, the key philosophical idea really is the understanding of the evolution and emergence of everything in terms of their causes and conditions alone. And it is through the aggregation and coming together of causes and conditions that events come into being. And so this points to the Buddha's teaching on pratitha samuppada, dependent origination, particularly in terms of causes and conditions.
Time. Tadi kasa ta kunjung tamba slavyonde ta onde tangala dire ile 좀 된데 denshi sumbe kadoliya denshi ngol daba saadegi shine su sumburisha 된다 shine 된지래 되네 denshi chawal daba slavizane ta shine su dinjibe indusane ene ngara도 동네 메드바다 대원 대바리 dinje 인도 ene langdon judo duk chawale diso denshi chawal rebu도 chawal daba slavizane ta 대대비 ene langdon judo chaba yina rebu condition 그랬을라나 ene 동네 셔바시다 동네 군중 자원에 봐 매바 차연도 동네 lar 셔바샤 군중 lar 방차 이거 말이지 고봉도 차요 고봉도 셔 심벌이 람 고벌 차요 람 고 심벌이 전에 도선다 som벌이 근데 이 전에 상제베 최디 미지 나 최냠내신 땡조디 밀루차디가래 가라슬럼나 최디 최도 남지기 싫어 그 타네 냠내치야지 쏘고 차용을 인도산에 최도 남지기 싫어 다 약수지 밀루된데 근데 이 인도산에 밀루된 거 타라스 다 랑도디도 세다 냠내치니 다 거봐 용 쏘버지 다 쳐야지 송교아리 근데 이 인도 고조서디 미지 미 탐해봐 진짜지 아니 림기야 denshi langdon jugdo sheni thirdu ini domain yawar shiwe nishi yingmodu cheya chidu hajirda Buddhism sadi a kind of Humanism sigdowa di pachi lobchor se miji yados kasorita 다 측하실로는 늘 소리로도 좋아서도 미지 탐해베 미지 타르니 다야 타방고도 쳐봤으니 타방고도 쳐다 터도다 남경고도 쳐서도 미지 군조 찾아봐도 산제베 군조 찾아봐도 야유되지 자장가 테스틱 디디야 테스틱 슐루디디 군조 내 마도스다 밀마중 되지 안된 낭배셔디 노다나도 때문에 그 미지 림베치는 컨디션이 오고 되셔야 되지 또가 오늘 상제베 최디 상제가 송을 봐 마초 말베슬라베이나 상제 좀 되도 코로나에 태고 투무 원도 제베이나 얘네 토마니 가갈이야 간다 도시는 거 봐도 사마제 봐도 심전 차디요. 전주서 소수요 차디요. 근데 도시단이야. 뭐 봐도 상제변 자반자. 구시等于그 상제 셔베 이나야. kora tamebe nambala ten goya ge gyumzen di michi ya sanje goya chi me du chane gyumze di chane di tön do wa 당군데 고라미 산제라가 나버 당군데 댄샤나 지그르와 고사도 산제는 잡아자고 누가 고사도 산제는 잡아자고야 디미 탐해버지 산지 고바 주장 다디 띵도와.
So now when we look at the way in which Buddha actually taught the Four Noble Truths, in the scriptures we see that Buddha repeated the statements of the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering in its origin and the cessation and the path that leads to that cessation. First, Buddha identified what are those four truths, what is suffering, what is the origin of suffering, and what is the possibility of a cessation, what are the paths that would lead to that cessation. And by speaking of the specific natures of these Four Noble Truths, the Buddha, in a sense, set out our understanding of the nature of reality, how cause and effects play in this reality. And in the second level, Buddha talked about the functions of these understanding of the Four Noble Truths, the nature of the Four Noble Truths. And the function here is how, on the basis of the understanding of this nature of reality, as an individual, how should an individual go about implementing that knowledge into a day-to-day life and living an ethical and spiritual way of life. And then the third aspect that the Buddha spoke about on the teaching of the Four Noble Truths is how, by applying these functions of the knowledge of the Four Noble Truths, what kind of results that the individual practitioner would achieve. And here Buddha made statements such as suffering must be recognized. So the first, he said, this is the truth of suffering. With respect to the second, the function, he said, suffering must be understood or recognized. That's the function. And with respect to the purpose and the fruit result, he said, although suffering is to be understood and recognized, but there is no suffering to be understood and recognized. So what he is talking about here is that once you have, as a result of applying your knowledge of the nature of suffering and lived an ethically sound way of life and attained the result, then there is no more further suffering to be recognized and eliminated. So if you look at the way in which the Buddha taught, first of all, the nature of suffering, nature of the Four Noble Truths, the functions of the Four Noble Truths, and the fruits of the knowledge of the Four Noble Truths and the practices based upon that, what we see here is a fundamental pattern that is and that reflect the understanding of the stages of the path within the Buddhist tradition. So here what we see is, in the Buddha's teaching, a pattern of a journey of an individual from the starting point of an ordinary human state. And here the human existence is really seen as the ideal physical existence to engage in the Buddhist path, because Buddhist path and practice involve maximum utilization of human intelligence, and therefore human existence is really seen as the ideal bodily existence to engage in the Buddhist path. So what we see here is a pattern of a journey, spiritual journey, where starting from the individual ordinary human state through a progressively more awakened state, ultimately culminating in the attainment of full liberation, as well as including full awakening of Buddhahood. So when you look at it in this way, there is some truth in some people when they characterize Buddhism as a form of humanism, because it essentially presents a path that unfolds from an individual ordinary human state to an enlightened state. And this is quite different from the basic pattern of a spiritual path and the evolution of the spiritual teaching in the theistic traditions. In the theistic tradition, the fundamental origin of the spiritual teachings is a form of a revelation coming from a transcendent being. From there is a kind of a more top-down evolution, whereas in the Buddhist spirituality, the evolution is more from bottom up, from the level of an individual, ordinary human being to an awakened state. Now, of course, one can raise a question saying that even in the case of Buddhism, Buddhist spirituality, aren't the teaching, the paths themselves taught by an enlightened being, the Buddha, in other words, the Buddha, the historical Buddha? Here, of course, a common understanding that is shared by, one perspective that is commonly shared between the Theravadins and the non-Theravadins is that up until the point when Buddha attained enlightenment under the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, Buddha was a bodhisattva, a sentient being, and under the Bodhi tree at Bodh Gaya, Buddha attained full awakening. That marks transcendence from an ordinary human being to an awakened, fully awakened Buddha. But even in the case of Mahayana perspective, where the historical Buddha, even from birth, is already seen as a manifestation of someone who had already attained the embodiment of the four kayas, the four Buddha bodies. Even here, one will have to recognize that the Buddha's deed of attaining enlightenment under the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya has a special significance, because the significance here is to illustrate to the followers of the Buddha that the Buddhist path has to be is a journey from a state of ordinary human being to an awakened state of full Buddhahood.
Doji Tsina, yeah, any two sung Sanja Tanjalo, and a Sosukyo Jineas, any Zimki Lamkon Sanjo, Shada is.
In fact, there is a statement in one of the sutras, scriptures, which states that all the Buddhas of the three times are and will be Buddhas who were initially ordinary sentient beings who, through the journey, became fully enlightened.
Ta Damasumba Gogwe Damba Sedeade, Ta and Tagilabdeage, Ta Tunge Lara Kent Tantrayana, Kim Mirundu Chedeage. Dindigi Nego Chita, Yontuya Yotame, sing Dishiki Hare. Nella Tungeji Tunge Pa Tanto Paya Chick. Then Go Tunge Paya. That Turdurute, Duji Tunge, Tanto Paya Chick. That this Samdayalia, Nella Tunge di Yukangi Chidua. That's Samdan Udua. Tunge di Yukangi Chidua, Samdan Duzane, Tunge Yu Gunjung Satimbare. Ta Gunjung and Lady Gunjung, the Yumube Gunjung, Nishani, Zozo de Yumube Gunjung Chariari. Last Yadi, Jir Dundig Dendi Sadin Nangse Chebabuchi, Gunungi, Zawada, Gunungi Chabadan Devakwane, Jujin Sato to Shabachilla, less Yari. Tinje lady, Gunungi, Chabadan Devakwane, Sasha Jimbe, so let's all the dependent, let's all the Lumating Lakasha Consciente, penetrating led to Teddy, Gunungi Chabadan Devatane, Sasha Jim, Kuiba into Sane, that Gunung Negate, Cash of Chariari. That in our Numo said Ligiari. Takada Tungen Rujigi, Duty, Tunge Yungi, Shave Tane, Tunge Judume, the Umarba. Penat Tungi Dunga Chashana. Tunge Tunge, Tinduji Sonama in Bella, say di Tunge Dene, Tungi Tunge Dene, Saw Tunge Dene, let the song as Sujimarba. Co Jundelia, the Casuripe, Simiruchen, Junde Yamar Salo, Tendegi, Mongo Chik Wangi, that landed Mongo said, D Wangi, Sonama in Bella Sani. Don't you doing the only Daya 가수를 대기세야 돼 샹라 팬드들이 연구를 해서 동해세야 돼 샹라 너바전에 연구를 해서 하게 교든 레벨 남샤디 시 교든 레벨 남샤들은 몽고디 멤버체 레디인에 다라 착배 다차 다도 즈바 된대기 착배 관계 레사네 윤두잔에 해질 다디 용되게 가사 주부디 개회를 되지 코아펜지다 미유엘라이네리 소남글라이네리 해지도 수준들이 자들이 인도산에 가다 동네지 동네에 교회 동네 도시기 동네 생활이 영향하게 그 레사야게 사회 군으로 또 인도산에 랜드를 뭐래봐 대자로 투서디 대코나니 뭐래봐 대왕게 레지도 사유고요 배지세도 다 대코나니로 뭐가 머리고 써야 돼 매소 투야 여더매 디 매소 투야 여나 대왕게 사셔래 레디디 도토그래 대왕게 제부 동에서부터 도토그래 사진에 인도 다 투서디 대코나니로 뭐가 머리고 써야 돼 세투야 여더매 사디 삼당고요 하래 다디 냐라 몽버지 인더메스야디 로티 치드르 샴바나시 턴을 내여나 몽버 말봐 그 치다 그 가서 그런 거는 지금시 리그를 넣어 봐 사만 봐 로튼들 다 머리 벗으잖아 턴 지마지신 미시바 양나 친지로도 떠고 질리야 스티가 봐 사실은 이 말이잖아요. 대코나니로 뭐가 어려워 쓰잖아요. 그 친지로 또 조대 친지로 또 똑바로 쓰기 하래. 드리인도 로테 지도 소원이 되는 내 유명해를 심주체니. 대내 신에 대다스 준비 로테 아니 친지로 로인데면 탁 주셔 봐. 드리인도 다 다음에 와 사다 디가 레고 하래. 다음에 따와 사 디가 레고 하래. 다 다음에 따와 셔인도 전에 남괴 좀 되나 놀이야 차라 먹고 지원되기다 그 차라 서울에 다시 실차를 차라 먹고 지어야 거야 다 안데 배가 하고 루주 나도다 루주가 전장 소지고 그래 자들이 이메인도 전에 다 다천의 정신이 두도 못 주사다 내가 상담해 머리고 쪼디 정신이 두번쯤을 놓치지 정신이 두번쯤을 놓지 머리가 인다면 치료로 인다면 해야 돼. 러시기 주위에 가서 재주시기로 봐. 다와디 아니 동리사야 돼 가는 말래 용기. 동리가 다와서야 돼 갈래 용기 아래. 다디 십제 제셔줘야 돼. 콜로 담불거도 제셔줘야 말에. 콜로 발배거로 섬로 섬머치대에서 되거로 다 제셔줘야 아래. 섬런 신기 동아래. 셈 코랑 그 내루스도야 말이지. 셈게 일루 제용보이나 셈디 니그 말이 셈 가서 최신 셈게 나와도 봐 가네. 셈 아니 가서 그게 런신지 동점지 그 취니디 니용그레스. 뜻은 것도가 셈로 셈머치데 사디. 셈머치데 사디. 자, 내가 이번 인도산에 따와 동리가 따와 달아봐야 돼. 다 뒤편에 섬이야. 지금 최남 그때 어다 동반이 임배 정신이 주변 동의 경쟁이 때에 딱과래도 와서 다 대기가 경쟁이 된중 대래 다처를 신체 때는 중에 된중 쌈마인 거 때에 딱과 된중서 대간에 생겨래 때에 딱과 인상 때문에 라왕 주어 말했어. 때문에 라왕 주어지 담배 뒤시기야래. 그 때에 주어 인도산에 때에 딱과고는 주어 인상 그 라왕 주어지 야 말했어. 라왕 주어 야 말데 이네 라왕 주어도 낭신 나왔다도 셴배 로티 머리버들레스. 되시고. 저들이 인도 머리그 신유 순충 투비하지. 다 담이 주식이 리포트에 되게 머리가 신이 까요도. 다 동시에는 거든 주는 거야.
So, talking about suffering and its origin, and the third, particularly the third noble truth, which is the truth of cessation. So, the truth of so what we need to do as practitioners is to really inquire into the very question of the possibility of attaining such a cessation. So, what we mean by cessation is a state where even when you are confronted with the causes and conditions that would normally lead to afflictions and give rise to suffering, a cessation refers to a state where you will not, these causes and conditions which would otherwise lead to suffering and afflictions would not have the power to create afflictions and sufferings anymore. So that is the truth of cessation. And so when we talk about the cessation, we're talking about the cessation of the suffering. And already we spoke about 3 different levels of suffering: the evident, obvious suffering of our sensations, and the suffering of change, and suffering of pervasive conditioning, which is the more fundamental level of suffering. So by engaging in the path and living an ethically sound way of life, one will be able to gradually eliminate the causes and conditions that would give rise to these 3 levels of suffering, beginning with preventing the causes and conditions for the evident, more obvious sufferings, and then the suffering of change and so on. And so when we look, so what becomes important is to inquire into the causes and conditions that lead to these degrees of suffering. So this immediately takes us to the understanding the second truth, which is the truth of origin of suffering. So generally, when we speak of the origin of suffering, we are talking about 2 primary factors here. One is the karmic actions, volitional, intentional actions, and the afflictions, which are the basis from which these actions arise. And between these 2, the principal origin of suffering really are the afflictions. So whereas when we talk about karmic action, we are really talking about a subset of the larger cause and effect events. So what is unique about the karmic causation is the involvement of a sentient being and his or her intention. So when intention gets involved into a chain of causation, a new chain of causation is created, and that new chain of causation is referred to the karmic causation. So it's really a subset of the wider cause and effect processes. And so the karmic, so most of the important actions that we engage in that really matters, that has significant consequences, tend to be actions that are driven by intentions or motivation. So, and it is the motivation and the intention that determines the quality of the actions that we engage in. So when we talk about the motivation, we are already talking at the level of our states of mind that give rise to these actions. And here, the afflictions have a very important role in creating the intention and the motivations that we have. And so, and at the root of all of these afflictions is really ignorance, because there is not a single sentient being that would willfully, knowingly create the causes and conditions for his or her own suffering. Because our basic aspiration is to aspire for happiness and to wish to overcome suffering. So all our activities are really driven by that fundamental aspiration. But so we still continue to experience suffering and suffering because somewhere there is an ignorance involved of the causal conditions that give rise to suffering and the pain. And here, when we speak of ignorance, there can be different types of ignorance. The ignorance with respect to the karmic law of cause and effect, and also even this ignorance, sometimes we may be aware of what are the causal relations of an intentional act and its consequences, yet still we can continue to create conditions for suffering because there's a deeper level of ignorance, which is not just related to the causation, but also based upon a distorted understanding of our own experience, our own existence. And this is referred to as the ignorance pertaining to the nature of our own reality. So in other words, much of our actions are kind of driven by, at a very fundamental level, are grasping at a false sense of selfhood, some kind of concrete self. And therefore, if one is interested in the project of attaining freedom from suffering, it becomes crucial to understand whether or not there is a possibility of getting rid of that fundamental ignorance. And it is in this context the Buddha's teaching on the no-self, anatman, becomes important, because it is only by cultivating that insight into the true nature of self, which is no-self, that one will be able to undo this fundamental ignorance. So when we speak of ignorance, we are talking about a state of mind that is either a mere form of unknowing, just ignorance, simple ignorance, or we are talking about a state of mind that is a distorted form of knowing. And therefore, we are talking about a state of mind whose perspective is contrary to the actual reality. So if that is the case, then at least in principle, this suggests a possibility of removing that ignorance, because it is a distorted form of knowing which is contrary to the actual reality. There is a possibility, by cultivating its opposite perspective, which is a correct perspective on reality, one may be able to eliminate this ignorance. And here, the teaching on no-self becomes crucial. So when we speak of the Buddha's teaching on no-self, of course, within the Buddhist tradition, there are different interpretation of the Buddha's teaching on no-self, various levels of subtlety. And the main primary interpretation of the Buddha's teaching on no-self that we shall be following here is that of Nagarjuna. Nagarjuna, according to Nagarjuna, the full understanding of no-self can arise on the basis of understanding all phenomena and being devoid of inherent intrinsic reality, objective independent reality. And so therefore the Buddhist teaching on no-self thus become directly related to the teaching on emptiness, the Buddhist philosophy of emptiness. And so when you understand how the teaching on emptiness is relevant to this concern of seeking to end suffering and its causes, and then we will see that the teaching on emptiness has a great significance. And when we talk about the Buddha's teaching on emptiness, the full explanation of emptiness is not found in the first turning of the wheel of Dharma, which is the teaching on the Four Noble Truths, but rather in the second turning of the wheel of Dharma, which includes teachings such as the perfection of wisdom, and including the statement that I cited right at the beginning of this talk, that the mind is devoid of mind because the essential nature of mind, the nature of mind is clear light. So what this point is, a further level of understanding of Buddha's teaching on dependent origination. Earlier, we understood the teaching on dependent origination only at the level of cause and effect relations and cause and effect dependent relations. Now here, when we bring the teaching on emptiness, we can understand the dependent origination also on the basis of mutuality of dependence, where the concepts are mutually defined on the basis of each other. And in this way, the understanding of the principle of dependent origination becomes much more extensive. It's not confined only to the conditioned phenomena, but it embraces the entire spectrum of all phenomena. And so in this way, if you understand, then you will understand that all phenomena are not only dependently originated, but also they are dependently designated. Therefore, none of them possess any independent identity of their own or independent existence of their own. And their existence can only be posited on the basis of a dependent relation. So therefore, because they are devoid of independent identity and existence, they are devoid of any substantial reality, and the state of mind that perceives them to possess such intrinsic objective existence will therefore be distorted, and by eliminating that distorted state of mind, which is ignorance, one will there be able to attain the true cessation. So it is in this way the teaching on emptiness and no self becomes directly related to the teaching on cessation, the Buddha's the third noble truth.
Yeah. 대대의 동해 녀르시의 니시인 그 곡된 대다 또 상스타요나 용시브지 해제디 용서의 사버지 다 윤두자네 다디 탑지기 탑려야 럭고야래 다 될려야니 람 거버자서야 다 되인버래 자 다데 람조 상동스디 거버시스디 동유도베 아니 시라 송지기 다 시르트 송고야래 다음에도 시라 송지기다 너는 지도도베 다 상동 다 디게고야래 대영원래야 심지지게 삼댕 러버디 고야래 대영원래야 수중 러버 고야래 달에는 러버 숨신 송고야래 러버 송 남냠린 제베 타네 아니 림베기 아니 람지 템봉 오마디 파괴 람리 파괴 이시 등원도 제네 아니 방자 가요 롱어지 응어지 년부 제네 아니 방자를 매매매매 받아 샌거야 그때
So
다 방자 세트야 예배다 좀지 개체직이 semranshi yu esawa se sungdeya di sem chime leba chenshi bayi na kadu yu na ya ene sem ma se bodu chima se ya mebe so shita sem chisi nebe rinja chima na ya shaba yi na ene sem ki gyun di la denge ine chima mebe chigi nega biji ene sha ma shima chagru ba so that chime chodi di sem motivo chenge chime chadi di luburu wale chebe luburu we tendi deru resi yare deru imba di ko chiji logo tokpa shimba indu zane chiji logo lochi yin shinja la ko kaso re ten nama dele ko pa chiji logo to dengi shimba indu ten nama ko shegengi lochi kadu yine yongde kiri ba sa jinde indu zane chiji logo lochi ina tela nyebu tomde kadu yine yoyebare do ba 다 랑게 줄에 니 못담데 게마게레 마도 신 지르 니 못담데 지 여르고 근데 이마 인도산에 랑게 줄에 니 못담데 게 돼야돼 사회 랑게 셰베 세리기 균삼데 주머째도 게가 말이스 자다 세리기 셰베 균지 때문에 아니 지메냐 못담된지 세리기 셰베 디 때문에 샤르투나 아니 세리기 셰베 때문에 몸베 왕기 게셰베 추벨로 스네면도 모두로 디디 매바차도 그래스 와다 독세니 아니 람지 때바 곰네 코네 콘도니 로야다 베토 그래 스타디송 그래
So with respect to the truth of cessation, as a result of reflecting deeply on the manner in which our fundamental ignorance distorts our perception of reality, and how our fundamental perception, this ignorance really is not in tune with the actual reality, and how this fundamental ignorance serves as the basis of all the afflictions and the attendant sufferings that it gives rise to. When one becomes to a point where one can see, at least in principle, the possibility of bringing about such a cessation, then one needs to seek the ways and means by which that cessation can be actualized and attained. And here, of course, the fourth noble truth, the truth of the path, becomes relevant. So when the Buddha speaks about, therefore, when the Buddha says, therefore, cultivate the path, actualize the cessation and cultivate the path, he's talking about the path that would lead to such cessation. So in the context of the Four Noble Truths, the principal path that is being cultivated is a deep insight into the nature of ultimate reality, where there is a synergy between a tranquil state of mind, a calm abiding, and a deep insight into the nature of reality. So there is a combination of tranquil mental state and an insight. However, in order to cultivate that principal path, one must first establish the basis, which is an ability to retain one's focus of mind single-pointedly on a chosen object. So here, therefore, one needs to cultivate the concentration, qualities of concentration. And in order to cultivate such qualities of concentration, one must ground one's way of life in a sound morality and observe the basic laws of morality. And so therefore, the Buddha taught in actual practice of the path, he taught what are known as the three higher trainings in morality, higher trainings in concentration, and higher training in wisdom. And so it is therefore by engaging in the practices of these higher trainings, one will be able to actualize the path, cultivate the path, and then actualize the cessation. So then the question is, why is such a cessation possible? One of the fundamental reason for this is, as explained before, the essential nature of mind is pure. Although our mind is diluted, but the pollutants of the mind are adventitious because our essential nature of the mind is this mere luminosity and experience, and at that level the mind is pure. And since all the pollutants of the mind that obscure and afflict our mind arise as a result of accidental or occasional conceptual processes, including the afflictions, one can see that by penetrating into the ultimate nature of reality and seeing through the deception of our fundamental ignorance, one can remove these. Because if our essential nature of mind itself is diluted, then there is no real hope. Because so long as we possess mind, we will possess a diluted mind, and we can never envision the possibility of a continuity of mind that is free of these pollutants. However, according to Buddhism, the essential nature of mind is pure, and it's mere clear light, and the pollutants that obscure mind really arises from these conceptualization and afflictions, and all of which are rooted in this fundamental ignorance. So therefore, by removing this fundamental ignorance, the whole processes that give rise to these adventitious pollutions can be removed. And in this way, one will be able to actualize the true cessation that one is aspiring for. And therefore, the fourth noble truth was taught, which is cultivate the path, cultivate the true path.
Then Tantrayana, I think one special, the unique thing about Tantrayana practice is make distinction, grosser level of mind and energy, and subtle level of mind and energy, make distinction. Then the subtle mind, usually the grosser level of mind, active. The subtle mind remain inactive. So try to subdue the grosser level of mind, so that the subtle mind then become active. So then the subtle mind transform into the wisdom which understand Shunya. So that's unique thing about Tantrayana. So 10:31. Finish.